Welcome to the Pledge Pros podcast, a podcast dedicated to unmatched value and unwavering support for our customers and the community at large. Today, we have Bryan Decker, the CEO of Compass Consulting. He was on before, which his episode will be dropping soon, so to introduce him, but we had to get this out. We wanted to talk about a very nuanced thing, something that I'm not familiar with, but is Compass Consulting's expertise. His team are absolutely crushing it in this space, and that space is data centers. So, Bryan, welcome back to the Pledge Pros podcast.
Thanks, Brian. So happy to be here.
It sounds good, man. Yeah, I'm excited. I know you and we text a lot. We're all talking on the phone. We're chopping it up. We're bouncing things off each other. And I know just like a week ago, you and I were talking, and I was trying to convey to you like some of the industries that I've been a part of, which is heavy industry, Steve adoring heavy equipment, and how the presence of a CMMS or EAM or something like that, or its utilization, is a lot less or non-existent than a lot of people would think. Yeah. Considering like data centers, like they're everywhere and they control everything when it comes to, I mean, stuff I don't even know about, clouds and internet and whatever. But I wanted to, you and I agreed, I wanted to have you on because I know that is a niche spot for you guys, and a lot of your customers are in data centers, and you've provided a tremendous amount of value and success for them navigating the space, selecting appropriate software and things like that. So I guess to kick us off, why do you think that there's somewhat of an underrepresentation or underutilization in that space of these softwares?
The data center, industry is pretty new, right? I mean, if you look back at manufacturing's been around forever, right? And oil and gas been around forever, but data centers, holistically is a pretty new industry. And, the focus of that industry is largely on growth, keeping up with the capacity requirements of, their customers, right? As everything moves, to the digital world, everything moves online, that information has to be, stored in a data center. And so those capacity requirements are coming in. So these companies are very focused on staying ahead of that curve and making sure that, that capacity is in place before their customers need it. And so because of that, maintaining their assets and, the maintenance and reliability side of the house, kind of takes a backseat. It tends to be an afterthought where, something has to happen, or it has to, kind of start biting you before you really look into, oh, whoa, what are we doing holistically as a company in this area? So kind of what we've seen in most places is, you got a data center company, they build their first data center, and that data center determines how they're going to do this. And then as they grow, the second data center comes along, the third data center comes along. Some of that tribal knowledge gets passed on, but then they have their good ideas about how to do things. And pretty soon you end up with a non-standardized way of approaching maintenance and reliability at each data center. And so that's troublesome once you get to a certain size, because now you have massive differences in, the number of assets that, you're tracking and doing maintenance on. You could be doing maintenance on, on an annual basis in one site and a, semi-annual basis on another. You may have a list of spare parts that you're keeping on the shelf that's, 3,500, items long at one and 177 at another. So you've got mass differences that start to appear if you don't set that foundation kind of right away, and with an eye on maintenance and reliability, with an eye on how are we tracking the maintenance and the asset data that we're using to maintain these assets that are crucially important. Then then you're going to end up with what I just described. So I think that's the reason why is it's just not typically, kind of the first thing that they're thinking of. And it costs a lot later on, right? Because what you end up having to do is go back and scrub everything and clean it up, right? All while you're still introducing bad data, right? And so kind of what we've seen around the industry is folks are spending millions and millions of dollars to clean up not having that foundation in place from the get-go.
Right. Yeah, the maintenance, the work doesn't stop, right?
Oh, that's right. The work's always ongoing, and it's crucially important for uptime, right?
Yes.
I mean, you can't let these assets go down. You see that in many other industries as well, right?
Right.
But you start having those conversations as well, right? Hey, I need to go back and do all this maintenance I haven't done. Well, I can't do that, right? I can't take these machines down. So having that strategy put in place to know when things are going down, be able to group them together. So, maybe you take, in this power path, we're gonna conduct these activities during this time, and you lay your plan out that way. And it's very difficult to do that at scale without a CMMS or without an EAM solution.
Sure. Do you find sometimes, so when I think about manufacturing and I think about equipment in manufacturing and equipment in heavy industry, it often takes some time and investment to really work out the design changes of what you're doing, right? And then the hope is when a business scales is that they don't make the mistakes they made the first time, right?
Yeah.
And then introduce those mistakes inherently by design into the next order of assets, right? And I'm ignorant to data centers. I don't even think I've ever even been in one. If you were to like show me 10 buildings and say which one's a data center, I might only know by the amount of air conditioning that's on the roof, but other than that, I would have no idea. So do you find that in these data centers as they are building and adding on, are they built modular like can you add to them, or is it physical space that is the problem, or like I just talk to me as if I genuinely don't know.
Yeah.
How do these things like build and grow? Because the only thing I know about them is they need a ton of heat and air conditioning, they need standby power generation. And you mentioned something really cool about the power path, and now I'm thinking like they probably parallel all these things,
Yeah.
right? They're not all in series, so you can actually down certain things and keep certain things up, which is kind of neat. Can you talk about that a little bit for
Oh, for
people like me
sure.
who don't know?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, to answer your last question first, because it popped in my brain. There's a ton of redundancy in the design for any data center, and that may be the reason that you see there's not as many reliability programs in place at data centers across the world right now as you would see in other industries, because you have so much built-in redundancy, and so they're designed in a way that if you lose part of the building, part of a you lose a row, most likely you're okay from an impact standpoint. Not the perfect solution there, right? But it is
Sure.
a very heavily designed for redundancy. But you know, the first part of your question is kind of nuanced, right? Because it depends on the company themselves. So, if you own your own data centers, and so that data center is built for your own data, what we found is most of those companies build their own, right? And the design changes in an iterative fashion where they're introducing new technologies, they're trying out new things, but the design, it's pretty much it's not modular, it's customized from iteration to iteration. So at a company I used to work at, we had a brand new building built, and it didn't even look like the building next to it. Same function, same form, right? But it's this really ultra modern looking, almost looked like an office building next to a traditional looking data center, right? So it really depends on the company, but there are a lot of companies out there that have taken a modular approach where they're prefabbing things and putting them in place, and so they almost look very similar as you go through.
Like
So it
cookie
depends on the
cutter.
company. I think the common denominator there is almost everyone's building, and almost everyone's adding that physical infrastructure.
Right.
And I know you said you haven't been in one before, but if you go into these data halls, and it just blows your mind how many servers are there. And if you're thinking about all the computing power and the just the amount of data that's being held there is just blows your mind, because you kind of imagine a long room full of servers with all their lights blinking, right? It's
Bunch
it's
of
a
Wi-Fi routers just blinking and stuff.
yeah, kind of.
I have zero
Um,
frame of reference, honestly.
but it does bring up an interesting thing that I think we can talk about in the CMMS EAM space, where as you're building, right, how is that data getting into your CMMS or EAM, right? That's an important topic to bring up, way before you need it, right? Because we've seen problems there a lot with some of our clients where, you've got a lot of asset data that's being entered by, folks that are in the trades that, they finish doing their work, they go to the computer, they enter it in, and they move on. Contracted workers that are putting the data in. And so, ensuring that your data quality is there prior to it entering your system is huge.
Right.
And we've seen a lot of issues there as well, because what ends up happening is you'll have duplicate part numbers, right? So you may not know which part you're getting downstream when you're trying to get spare parts, or when you're trying to look at asset performance. If you could have an asset that's severely underperforming, and you wouldn't know if they're tied to different part numbers in your system. So if you're paying attention to those kinds of things, you need to make sure your data is good so that you're actually getting correct asset performance data, knowing that hey, maybe in the next iteration of our design, maybe we look a different direction for this particular asset because it's underperforming what we expected it to, or not great in the application that we determined to use it in.
Right.
So it's from a design standpoint, there's a lot of factors that go into that. But CMMS is the central part of that, right? I mean, that's where the rubber meets the road, right? You're gathering all this data and you're building this data center, but it all is going to feed into your EAM or your CMMS so that you can do work and maintain those assets to keep your uptime where you want it to be, as close to 100% as possible. And if you have issues up here, then you're going to feel them, when you're actually executing the work.
Right. And one of the things I think about too is, with your explanation of like, just imagine walking into like a giant hall or warehouse and it's just rows of these things. They're probably all look the same with some respect, right? So one thing that comes to my mind is, if, having been a tradesperson who's doing the work, I'm working on various different machines, a lot of commonality. What commonality is very strategic for cost avoidance, training, risk, all those things, right? Spare parts. My first thought is, being a new person in a data center or a mechanic or whatever you call them, people that work in there, the technicians,
Sure.
it must be hard to find the thing you should be fixing, right? So how important is asset nomenclature? And are you using, I know servers sometimes like have their own serial number from the manufacturer. Like, are they using that and chopping that up and making like a physical visual display? Are they broken into rows? And like, how is it broken up to where technicians and people doing the work can understand where they are when they're going to repair an asset?
Sure. Another nuanced thing, I think each company kind of does their own. And we've seen issues in this area when you have different teams in the data center, right? You've got your facility operations team, you've got your network folks, you've got your site operations folks. If they're all creating their own nomenclature,
You don't want
and
that.
they're not working together, then you'll end up having an asset that has one nomenclature in one system and another in another system. So we've seen that issue before, but they're generally made by the company that owns the data center. At asset creation, when you're folding them into your building management system, or folding them into your space view, or whatever they're using to identify where things are. But the nomenclature is huge because one, it's attached to your asset, and like I said before, you want to make sure that you're getting all the data that you can get from your asset to know how it's performing, what's being done on it and when. But from you mentioned something that I wanted to speak to. It's not too hard to find things once you get into the room, right? I think when you enter most data centers that I've been into, you're looking at long hallways that just have doors, right? So once you get in the right room, it's just like any other machinery room. You'll be able to find the asset you're looking for pretty quickly. It's just getting to the right electrical room, or getting to the right water room to be able to do the work that you're doing.
Right.
Overall, the data centers aren't very complex from an engineering standpoint, but they're massively important, right? And so they are split between each area, and that's a nuanced thing as well. You have some companies that run pods. So if you're a company that leases space out to your customers, right, like a co-location data center, they usually run pods that have their own AC, maintain humidity in their pod, and
And they can
you end
monitor
up with
each individual pod.
correct. Yeah.
Right.
And then if you have a data center that's not building in a modular pod way, then you're looking at more building controls, right? And how are you maintaining everything in the ASHRAE window there for temperature and humidity for your equipment.
Right. And that kind of brings me to my next question here is surrounding the infrastructure to support the data center itself fundamentally, right? Which is we're talking about removing heat and maintaining humidity or vice versa, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And the building's automation system or BAS, um, do you find that companies are using that or are prioritizing that over the physical assets within the room?
I would say I have seen that. I think some companies do really well, having someone that roves around the spaces, right? And a lot of issues are caught that way, where hey, there's water dripping here, we need to get that fixed, and they issue a corrective maintenance work order in their CMMS. Or hey, this door is about to fall off, right? Those things you can't see, looking at your building automation or building management system. And so I think that's a critical factor. With kind of the environment that we were in, we talked about it in a previous podcast, but a lot of companies started looking at hey, how are we utilizing our resources? Where's our money going? And so maybe stopped using those folks as much, right? But I think that's a key factor that you don't ever want to lose sight of, because someone needs to walk through and make sure things are okay.
Yes.
So, but having said that, the other reason for ensuring that the physical asset is being monitored is you get a lot of alerts and a lot of alarms in your building management or building automation system. That's something that I've seen every company fight with, right? Where they call them nuisance alarms or whatnot, but you get a lot of alerts that come in, hundreds a day in some cases. And so I've seen folks that they have someone that are sitting in a room watching everything come in, trying to determine like, hey, I should take action on that, or that's not important right now. So there's a lot of in the data center world, there's a lot of human interpretation required, even on these building management systems, where hey, this alarm came in, we need to go check that out, or this alarm came in, I know that piece of equipment's down, right?
Right.
So a lot of information comes in through those. We normally see what we would call a control center or a command center, where we have someone sitting and monitoring what's happening. That way they can make the determination on, kind of putting the pieces of the puzzle together, like, oh, hey, I think this chiller went down, we need to go check it out, or something of that nature. But the physical asset, I want to make sure I end with that. It's important to get eyes on those things, because there's a lot of things that can happen that could lead to a bigger incident if you don't take action on it, and you would never know just monitoring the data coming from sensors.
Right. And I'm pretty versed in the building side of like, the heat and air and the water and all that stuff, power generation. But from the actual like racks, if is that what you guys call them, right? Like the
Yeah,
other, I guess I really don't even know, but like, how would you monitor those? Not now take BAS out of it.
sure.
How would you monitor them remotely? Are you monitoring speed of something, temperature, current, power?
No.
Like
So
how are
there's a few ways. One, if you're talking about whether it's working or not,
or how do you know it's
honestly,
degrading, if you will? Like how would you know there's a failure mechanism happening on a server rack?
sure. You get a little red light in most cases, right? So obviously, you'll get an alert. It depends on how they have their building automation, building management system set up. They may get alert, they may not, right? But seeing a red light would show you that the individual server is down. The rack just holds all the servers, right? So the rack
That's what
itself,
I meant. Yeah, like
yeah, the rack itself's not going to have any automation on it. But what we do monitor, especially from the environment, right? The temperature and the humidity. So you'll have, depending on the design of the building, underfloor temperature or space temperature, temperature at the rack. that allows you to know that if something happens, say a chiller failed, or you have a damper that's stuck open, those conditions are being monitored, and they'll let you know if there's something that would be harmful to the racks or the servers themselves. But for the most part, if there's a failure on a server, you're going to get either an alert or a red light on the server itself, and those are all replaceable parts, right? So they would pull it and replace it with another one, and they maintain inventory of all those spares on site. I think the more complex side of that is you've got things like um, remote power panels, or things that would power a dual fed row. Maintaining an eye on what's the loading on that row itself, because you can easily overload it, right? Because you've
So
got
do they monitor current or power?
they do, yeah. So you'll monitor your loading there. And one issue I've seen on a couple of occasions where they intentionally overload it because they want more capacity, right?
Just like in
So
operations, when you want to run a machine to get 100 more widgets an hour, right?
yeah,
Good for the day.
yeah. So I've seen that on several occasions where you intentionally overload it. If something happens to one side, it overloads the other side. Now you've lost the entire row. All because you wanted to gain some more capacity out of it. So I think that in that case, monitoring that equipment in that space, if it's overloaded, is hyper important to make sure that you can get ahead of anything that might trip one side of that row offline.
Right.
But from a CMMS standpoint, we'll circle us back to that. If you didn't have a robust CMMS, then what you're leading yourself to is, if say you don't have someone that's walking around and you don't have a really good execution of your CMMS or your EAM, then you may have some things that happen that may take your entire capability to stay up down, right? And we've seen that too, where you've got flooding that occurs somewhere, flooding alarm goes off, didn't see it because there's so many alerts that come in, and now you've dropped power, and then they kind of cascade on each other. So I know I'm going doomsday here on you, but
No, no, it's good.
building that solid foundation, ensuring that the foundation is in place to, what assets that you have in the building. You've got all those into your EAM. You have a process to ensure that all the data associated with those assets are fed in, and that you have a process to make sure that anytime something changes, one thing I do want to speak to is retrofits, right? It's a big part of the data center world. But you have to have a change management strategy that updates that asset information as you change things, including things like drawings and things that you're going to use for
Sure.
your, right? Um, Retrofits are kind of an ongoing thing all the time, because if you look at a manufacturing facility, you've got an asset that you hope will last 40 years, right? That's not likely the case in a data center. The lifespan's usually about 4 years.
Hmm.
So you're kind of always retrofitting for newer technology to keep up with the capacity demands. AI is a great example, right? When we started bringing in the AI clusters, now you've got liquid cooled racks. Most data centers didn't have that technology in place at the time. And so now you've got a lot of retrofit activities. And well, now that you have liquid cooled racks, what's the impact on the overall building? Do you need to make changes in the way you're maintaining conditions in the building? Do you have to do a retrofit at that point, right?
Hmm. Yeah,
So there's a
it
lot
compounds, right?
for sure, yeah. So as you change, from a retrofit standpoint, it's important to have that process in place to ensure that your design supports the change, and that you have mechanisms in place to make sure that your information inside your CMMS is good
Sure.
and up to date.
Right. So I've had this conversation with many people about CMMS or EAM, right? And we talk about different industries, manufacturing, mining, data centers, facilities, all these things. To a point, that doesn't even matter, right? What you're maintaining really doesn't even matter. It's about the strategy you're trying to achieve that aligns with the bigger business, right? But it does get to a point where you're going to start optimizing and scaling, and there's some nuance and some maybe some odd operating characteristics, stuff like that, where you have to take it to like that deep into each asset, right?
Yep.
Um, And, that's like the thing is every CMMS is not one size fits all.
Sure.
It just doesn't work that way. I'm assuming in data centers, like most places, having a mobile function would be great, right? But there's some systems that don't offer a strong mobile platform, right? But they might be the best fit for the data center,
Sure.
or vice versa. So there's a lot of nuance there. The last thing I wanted to ask you, Bryan, is more surrounding, like, I don't want to say sustainability, but like the building itself, correct me if I'm wrong, is consuming a lot of power, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's transferring a lot of that into heat. The heat has to be taken away, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And in turn, your climate control systems are probably very robust, large. They're running 24 hours a day. Do you see, and again, I'm ignorant, do you see that the backup power generation is pretty substantial for these buildings?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And another nuanced area based on design, right? There's some large data center companies out there that are basically essentially like a swamp cooler, right? So they don't really use, chillers or deck units that often. They can bring in outside air, pass it through a media with water coming in. They can cut heat coming back up from the data hall in to maintain humidity, and all that's controlled. So we've seen that, but you also have a lot of data center companies out there that utilize chillers, and they have a sequence where at this point in time, you're going to have three online, and then if we reach this point, another one's going to come on, or another one's going to come on. Those always have chillers running, and so yeah, the power portfolio from a building that size or a campus that size is pretty big. But at the end of the day, you're maintaining, your heat or your humidity and your temperature inside that ASHRAE band. And so you're gonna use whatever is necessary to bring those in,
Right.
stay inside of that band, stay inside of your parameters that are optimal for the server so that you don't have issues.
Do
But I will
they?
tell you I wanted to speak a little bit to what you talked about before that, if that's okay.
Sure.
We talked a little bit about, CMMS or EAMs, one solution is not best for everyone.
That's
I
right.
I 100% agree. I think the selection process there is probably the biggest point I want to hit on. Um, you know, having a process where you can identify what are the business needs today and 5 years from now, right? And then how do we get there, right? What are those functional requirements that you're doing as a business to get you to meet those business needs? And then you do a fit gap, and attach those technical requirements to your business needs. And so that's the process that we utilize when we go and we identify what's the best EAM solution or CMMS solution for a business. And so if you're always tying those selection requirements back to what the business needs 5 years from now, then you're always going to have a solution that's going to work for the growth.
100%.
Because you can't,
100%.
if you'd have told me everyone predicted the AI boom and knew exactly how much capacity they were going to need, today from a data center standpoint, I'd love to talk to those folks because I don't think anybody really saw it boom the way that it did, right? And
Right.
so that's why you look ahead 5 years, right? Because you're projecting the capacity, but you want to make sure that whatever solution you're using is able to carry you through wherever the world leads us, right?
100%. Our job, your job, my job in this space, and in maintenance and reliability in general, and service in general, is to provide value. And to provide real value is even better.
Yeah,
Which is, to me, when you don't take the steps that you are saying, and even in our space, when we're doing big implementations for CMMS, right? If we don't take these certain things, and they can be tough, and like sometimes they're a pain to do, right? But if you don't, you're doing your customer a disservice. You're doing your customer a disservice by not going through these proper channels to recommend things, even if it's what you like. I might like something a whole lot and know it really, really well, but it ain't the right thing.
no, 100%.
Right. So you have to set yourself aside from these things, and you have to do the structured approach to understanding the business, the current and future needs, and then aligning a system or a CMMS or whatever to those
Yeah.
things. Right. And that's just important. I wanted to ask you one more thing. You got like 3 minutes. Just And the only reason I ask this is because it's really cool to me, and I had some experience with it in the past. How important is cogeneration so meaning taking waste heat, using it to heat water, all those types. How common is that at data centers?
It's nuanced again, depending on the design. It's very common to take, so you have a design where behind the server rack or the server rows, you have what's called the hot aisle and cold aisle containment, right? So on the front of the servers is the cold aisle, and all of the fans blow the heat into a containment, and that containment goes up. So you can utilize that heat to mix in with air coming in. You can utilize that heat any way you design it to, right? So I think that's a pretty common approach within data centers. Utilizing that heat in other ways, I haven't really seen. Doesn't mean it's not out there, but that approach, utilizing it to help maintain the temperature and humidity is very common. We've seen it a lot.
Right.
But you have to maintain that containment, right?
Right.
So that's another item you can track in your CMMS, right? Is are we verifying the physical integrity and maintaining the physical integrity of our hot aisle containment? But
right. And like I have geothermal heating and air for my home. And part of the system is a cogeneration where the waste heat is there's a water coil that's in with my geothermal coil in the actual unit in the house. And in the summertime, it's trying to pull heat out of the air in the house, right? And then it pushes that heat into the coil that goes into the ground, right? But in same line with that is a coil that goes into my hot water heater.
I love that.
So it's doing cogeneration on air conditioning only, not during heat. But so essentially, the water that goes into my hot water heater is pre-warmed or heated by the geothermal system. I'm not an expert on this. Like I could be saying this completely wrong, but all I know is hot water comes out of that geothermal unit and goes into my hot water heater. So the way it works is the hot water heater doesn't have to come on as often, right?
Yeah.
And my last thought here is you would think that data centers would be underground, right? Because at 3 feet, whatever, you have a constant temperature. You could maintain it, it would take less energy to maintain the temperature and all those crazy things. But I'll give you the last word, Bryan. What would you say to customers, people who are embarking on data center maintenance or are currently managing data center maintenance? What would be like your one piece of advice?
My one piece of advice would be, as soon as possible, lay a foundation for your maintenance and reliability strategy for the future. Go through, and we can help you with that, obviously, but go through a selection process to make sure that you have the right solution in place, and make sure you have a strong governance and a foundation for how you're going to intake that data and what that data is doing for you. I think from what I've seen in my career to this point, that saves you millions down the road and millions, right? So I think setting that foundation, I know it's really appetizing to look at the growth and look at where you're going, but always have an eye back towards how you're maintaining the assets that you have. You don't want to lose capacity while you're trying to gain capacity.
Agree.
That would be my final word. And I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about data centers with you today, Bryan. I appreciate the time.
Dude, no doubt. I'm glad to have you. And I will say you should reach out to Compass Consulting if you deal with data centers. I knew you didn't want to say it, Bryan, but I'm going to say it. You reach out to them. They know what they're talking about. Bryan's other half is Sean. I'm trying to get Sean on here. He's a busy dude. He is an ace. Sean, if you're listening, you're an ace, and we're going to get you on here and we're going to talk. But please reach out to Bryan. Reach out to us if you can't get a hold of Bryan. We will gladly connect you with him and Compass Consulting. And you've been wonderful, Bryan. We're going to talk more. This has been the Pledge Pros podcast, and on behalf of Upkeep, and we greatly appreciate it. Bryan, thank you, and we'll see you in the next one.
All right, thanks, Bryan. Appreciate it.
See you, man.